The harsh Wyoming wind scoured the dusty street as Anne tightened the final button on a woolen dress she had painstakingly mended. Her twin sister, Mai, sat beside her, her own fingers raw from the constant work of the needle. The cramped room tucked behind the mercantile was their entire world, a small space where their needles were the only things they could command in a town where two young Chinese women were regarded as little more than phantoms. They were 20 years old, orphans, and the citizens of this hardscrabble town had long ago cast their lot for them. In the town's collective gaze, they were simply the Chinese seamstresses, nothing more. The bell above their shop door jangled, and both Mai and Anne's shoulders went rigid. They recognized that heavy, deliberate footstep. Mr. Thorne filled the doorway, a human storm cloud reeking of tobacco and unchecked power. He owned the mercantile, the bank, and a significant portion of the county, and he desired them. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, his voice a low rumble as he stepped far closer than any respectable man ought to. Mai kept her eyes fixed on the sleeve she was hemming. "We are working, sir." "That's fine work," he said, but his gaze was not on the dress. It was on them, moving from one sister to the other. Such delicate hands should not have to struggle in a place like this. And stomach coiled into a tight knot. "The dress is for Mrs. Gable. We must complete it today." Thorne let out a low chuckle. "She will wear it to church and offer prayers for your souls." All in the same breath he carelessly pushed aside a bolt of calico, leaning even closer, his presence suffocating the small room. "I have made my offer twice now. It is not safe for two women alone. You need a husband. You need protection." "We are managing," Mai said, her voice a steady whisper, though a tremor of fear ran through her. "Are you?" Thorne's tone grew colder, sharper. "Winter is approaching. Work becomes scarce." His eyes glinted with a cruel light. "You fulfill your duty to me, and I shall fulfill mine. We will not be your wives," Anne stated, her voice barely audible. The smirk vanished from Thorne's face, replaced by a chilling cruelty. He reached out, his rough fingers intending to tuck a stray curl of Mai's silken black hair behind her ear. She jerked back as if struck. "Pennies from mending shirts won't save you," he hissed. "Your father's debts are substantial. They belong to my bank. The small house by the creek belongs to my bank." He walked to the door, pulling it open and allowing a gust of coal dust to swirl inside. "I will expect you both for dinner on Saturday. We will discuss the wedding arrangements." He departed, leaving them trembling in the sudden cold, staring at the empty doorway. That night, in the small, leaning house they shared, the sisters spoke in hushed, frightened tones. "We told him no," Mai whispered. "He doesn't listen," Anne replied, her voice filled with despair. "He owns everything." They ate their meager stew in silence, the food tasting of sorrow. Mai slept fitfully, but Anne remained awake, gazing into the dying embers of the fire. She could not marry Thorne. Neither of them could sell themselves to him. Yet, if they refused, they would lose everything. The next morning, they went to the mercantile for thread, keeping their heads bowed, praying they would not encounter him. But his voice carried through the thin wall of his back office. "They are being difficult," he said to an unseen person. "But if they will not come willingly, the bank will foreclose on Monday. Hunger will bring them to me. My property." And froze. The spool of thread slipped from her numb fingers and rolled silently across the floorboards. She and Mai slipped out the side entrance, their breath coming in ragged gasps as they ran home. A single thought consumed them: run. They packed what they could: bread, cheese, their sewing kits, a quilt, and their late father's old, heavy revolver. They took the few dollars they had saved in a tin box. They saddled their mare, Petal, and pinned a note to the door for the landlord, a simple, hopeless lie about visiting family. And then they rode, not daring to look back. 2 days later, they were battling through deep snow in the mountains. Nearly blinded by the biting cold and the swirling white, they followed nothing but a shared, desperate hope, praying the memory of a name was enough. Reese, the quiet rancher who had saved Mai from a runaway wagon years ago. The solitary man with storm-colored eyes. The man neither of them had ever forgotten. The night they found his cabin, they collapsed in the snow just yards from his door. They tried to crawl, but their limbs would not obey. Mai whispered, "Please," but the wind snatched the word from her lips. The door creaked open. A tall figure stepped into the storm, holding a rifle. He stared down at the two huddled forms for a long moment. Then he moved forward, grabbed them by their coats, and dragged them one by one inside. They gasped as the warmth of the cabin hit their frozen skin. He kicked the revolver away from their numb hands. He looked down at them with the same cold, grey-blue eyes they remembered. "Mai," he said, his gaze shifting to her sister. And it was not a question. He knelt, his voice low and rough. "You're freezing to death." And tried to speak, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Thorn. Please." Rhys stood, tossed a heavy blanket over them, and turned to the fire. "I don't know who Thorn is," he said, his back to them. "And I don't want to know." They shivered violently under the blanket, their shared hope a flickering candle in the wind. They had made it to him, but he was not the man they remembered. He was harder, scarred, and colder than the winter raging outside. They had run to the only man who had ever shown them kindness, but they did not know if he would save them this time. What if the only safe place left in the world was inside a cabin with a man who did not want you there? Mai awoke slowly, her bones aching from the deep cold she had survived. She lay on a cot beside him, both of them covered in thick furs, the warmth of the fire a gentle caress on their skin. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then she saw him. Rhys sat at a small table in the dim light, meticulously cleaning his rifle. His movements were steady, controlled, almost unnervingly distant. His face was rough with a beard, and a jagged white scar ran from his temple to his jaw. It altered him, made him look older, haunted, as if carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountain itself. "You're in my bed," he said without looking at them. "I expect you'll be out of it by morning." And pushed herself up, her muscles trembling with the effort. "Thank you. You saved our lives." "I dragged you out of the snow," he corrected, snapping a metal piece back into place. "The weather saved you, not me." Their hearts sank in unison. This was not the quiet protector they remembered. This man was sealed tight behind walls built of loss and solitude. Mai tried again. "We needed help. A man named Thorn." "I don't want to know," Rhys cut in, standing and walking away, his tall frame eclipsing the firelight. "I live up here because I don't want company or trouble." "You brought both." Their hands trembled. "We cannot go back," Mai whispered. "You will," Rhys said flatly. "When the storm breaks." 2 days, no more." And stared at him, her voice cracking. "He will kill us if we go back." "That is not my concern." But the sisters were stronger than he anticipated. And stood on shaking legs and walked to the far wall where water dripped through a loose log. "Your roof is leaking. The chinking is failing." "We can fix it." He didn't turn. Mai pointed to his coat thrown over a wooden peg, its sleeve torn wide open. "Your coat needs stitching." "We can fix that, too." Rhys finally looked at them, truly looked. They were pale, bruised by the cold, barely able to stand, yet they were offering to work. He shook his head. "I don't need seamstresses." "And we cannot go back to Mr. Thorn," Mai said, raw fear piercing her voice. "He will find us. He will take us." The terror in her voice struck something deep within him. He turned away quickly, hiding the conflict on his face. The wind howled outside, and the snow piled higher against the window. The mountain had trapped the three of them together, whether they liked it or not. "Fine," Rhys said at last, his voice rough with reluctance. "You cook, you mend. You stay out of my way." And just like that, a fragile, unspoken bargain was struck. The storm did not break. 2 days bled into 3, then a week. Snow climbed the cabin walls, erasing the world in a shroud of white. Rhys rigged a rope from the cabin to the barn, a lifeline against the blinding blizzards. Inside, the air was thick with tension. He hunted during the brief lulls, returning with little more than frozen hands and the scent of pine smoke clinging to him. The sisters cooked what little they had. They mended his torn coat, his socks, his shirts. Every stitch was a silent plea, "Please let us stay." He spoke little. They spoke little. The silence pressed down on them as heavily as the snow outside. One night, Mai dared to break it. "Our father, he was not a lucky man," she said quietly, her hands working on a torn sleeve while and listened. "He liked the saloon more than his family. He left debts." Reese didn't look up from oiling his rifle, but he was listening. "Thorn bought those debts," and whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crackle of the fire. "He threatened us." Reese's jaw tightened. Towns are full of men like Thorn. Mai hugged herself, staring into the flames. "We had nowhere else to go. We remembered you." He glanced at them then, just for a moment, before looking away again. 2 days later, he came home injured. Blood soaked the sleeve of his coat. He held his arm tight against his chest, his face pale and grim. "A wolf caught in a trap," he said tersely. "It wasn't dead." Myanan jumped from their chairs in unison. "Sit down. Let us see." He tried to wave them off, but a wave of pain forced him into the chair. They poured whiskey over the deep gash, and Reese inhaled sharply, but he made no sound. "This will hurt," and warned, threading a needle. "Just do it," he gritted out. They stitched his flesh together with careful, nimble fingers, though their own hands shook. His breath hitched once, just once, as he stayed perfectly still, watching their faces inches from his own. They smelled clean of soap and wood smoke, and their touch was soft, too soft. When they finished, Mai brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Her fingers grazed his skin. The touch was innocent, but it was enough to shatter the icy dam inside him. Their eyes met, all three of them caught in a sudden, breathless moment. The storm outside seemed to fade away. The crackle of the fire disappeared. There was only the sound of their mingled breaths and the thunder of his heartbeat in his ears. Reese leaned forward and kissed Mai. It was wild, desperate, the kiss of a starving man finding sustenance. She pulled him closer, her hand fisting in his shirt. Then he turned and his mouth found ans, just as hungry, just as desperate. He pulled away from them as if burned, his chest heaving, his hands trembling. "No," he rasped, backing away. "I can't. I won't." "Reese," Mai whispered. "You're scared. You're alone, and I?" He broke off, shaking his head violently. "I will not be like him." He grabbed his coat and stormed out into the freezing night, the door slamming shut behind him. The sisters sat in the firelight, trembling. The warmth of his kisses still burned on their lips, but the cold of his rejection crushed them. They curled together on the cot and cried softly, believing they had ruined everything. Reese stayed in the barn all night, sitting in the dark, drinking from an old bottle, trying to drown the desire he feared made him a monster. He did not sleep. The next morning, he returned, smelling of whiskey and snow. He did not look at them. He did not speak. Days passed in a silence so heavy it felt like another storm. Supplies dwindled. Hunger grew. On the 4th day, as Christmas Eve dawned bleak and grey, Reese's frustration finally exploded. The silence snapped like dry tinder. "This is not enough food," he said harshly, his voice grating. "You cannot stay. When the storm breaks, you leave." "We can't," Mai whispered. "I don't care." His eyes flashed with anger, but underneath it was fear, fear of losing control, fear of becoming a man like Thorn. "What did you do to make him hunt you this far? What does he want so badly?" And felt her heart break all over again. She lifted her head and whispered the truth. "He wants us because of a contract. A forged 1-inch. "What contract?" Reese asked, his voice low. Mai looked at him, her eyes filled with shame and terror. "The one that says we are the payment," she whispered, her body shaking. "He claims we belong to him." And Reese went perfectly still. He stared at them, his confusion morphing into horror, then into a pure, burning rage. He slammed his fist into the log wall so hard the tins on the shelf rattled. "No," he said, breathing hard. "No man owns another." It was a vow, a promise, a fire lit in the darkness. Tears fell down the sisters' faces, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear. Something inside them loosened, a knot that had been choking them for months. That night, Christmas Eve, the storm raged with renewed fury. They shared the last of the bread and a thin broth, the silence now one of shared dread. It was then, huddled by the fire, that Anne reached out and took his hand. Mai took the other. "Reese," Anne whispered, her voice trembling. "Tomorrow is Christmas. It might be our last." He looked at their faces, illuminated by the firelight, and saw not just fear, but a profound and heartbreaking affection. Mai's voice was barely audible above the wind. "We don't want to die without knowing what it is to be loved." She took a shaky breath. "We want sex with you on Christmas," she whispered. It wasn't a demand, but a confession of desperate, hopeless love from them both. 2 days later, as the storm finally began to calm, a single rider appeared in the canyon. A trapper tossed a sealed letter into the snow and rode away. Reese brought it inside. Mai broke the seal with shaking hands. Thorn's handwriting was thick and cruel. "The storm has cleared. I am coming to collect what is mine. Expect me by the end of the week." Anne's breath stopped. "He knows where we are," she whispered. They packed their few things in a frenzy. "We have to go, Reese. Please let us go." "He will kill you." Reese grabbed their shoulders firmly, his voice low and steady. "I am not sending you away." They stared at him, tears streaming down their faces. "But he will." "No," Reese said, his voice like iron. "This is where it ends." He looked toward the door, his jaw set with the steel of a man who had already lost too much. "He is not taking you." The old fear, the old pain, the old loneliness fell away. What remained among the three of them was something raw and powerful. For the first time, Mai and Anne believed they might survive this. Not because they were strong, but because they were no longer alone. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, it became a fortress. Reese worked with a sharp, dangerous focus, reinforcing the door with metal bands from an old wagon wheel and boarding up the window until only a thin gap remained for a rifle. Mai and Anne worked beside him, their hands steady, no longer trembling with fear. They were partners, a team, ready for the fight none of them had chosen but all refused to run from. "Mai, you stand at the front window," Reese said, his voice calm. "Anne, you take the side." "I'll take the door." They both nodded. Gideon paused, looking at them. These were not the scared girls who had collapsed in the snow. These were women who had survived storms worse than any winter, who had stood against men like Thorn. They now stood with rifles in their hands. He felt something deep and aching rise in him, a kind of awe, a kind of love. But there was no time to speak it. That night, the sound they had been dreading came, slow, heavy footsteps in deep snow. Horses, men, and a voice booming through the white darkness. "Reese! I know you're in there. Send out what belongs to me." "Thorn." Mai and Anne gripped their rifles, their breathing tight. Reese's face turned to stone. "They don't belong to you," he shouted back. Thorn laughed, a low, ugly sound that curdled the air. "Everything in this valley belongs to me. And they are the last dead I intend to collect." Another man rode forward with a torch. "Burn the barn," Thorn ordered. "Smoke them out. Take what's mine." "No," the sisters cried in unison. Then everything happened at once. Reese burst out the door, his shotgun raised. He fired a warning shot into the air. Snow exploded around the riders. Horses bucked. One man fell, clutching his leg. Gunfire crackled back, bullets punching holes into the logs of the cabin. Reese dove behind the woodpile. Mai, at her window slit, saw a man slipping to the side, leveling his gun at Reese from behind. Her breath froze. "Breathe out. Squeeze." She fired. The man crumpled into the snow. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. She had never taken a life before, but she had saved Reese's. The barn caught fire, the flames rising with terrifying speed, spreading through the dry hay. Horses screamed inside. Thorne, seeing the chaos, dismounted and ran not toward Reese, but toward the cabin door. He kicked it open and grabbed her by the arm. "You will learn your place," he snarled, dragging her toward the inferno. Smoke choked her lungs, heat seared her skin. She struggled, crying out for Reese and Mai. A shape burst through the fire. Reese! He didn't hesitate. He slammed into Thorne, ripping him away from her. The two men crashed into a stack of hay. Thorne swung wildly, but Reese's fists hit harder. "You will not touch them!" Reese roared, his voice filled with all the pain of his past, all the rage of seeing them hurt. Thorne staggered back, his hand closing around a pitchfork. Its sharp prongs gleamed in the firelight. He lunged. Reese dodged as the roof above them cracked with a loud groan. Smoke and sparks rained down. Thorne stumbled, lost his footing, and fell backward onto a broken, sharpened beam. There was a wet gasp, and then silence. Thorne was still. The fire roared around his body. "Reese!" Mai screamed from the doorway. The roof was coming down. Reese grabbed Anne's hand and ran, pulling her from the collapsing structure. A burning rafter crashed behind them as they stumbled out into the snow, falling side by side, gasping for clean air. Snowflakes melted on their scorched clothes. They had survived. For days afterward, the cabin was filled with the smell of smoke and a profound silence. Reese treated their wounds with gentle hands. They treated his burns with soft cloth. They mended each other quietly. Then the riders appeared on the ridge, a posse from town. Mai Annan's breath caught, afraid they would drag Reese away. But he stood tall. "I'll tell the truth," he told them. In town, people stared and whispered. The sisters were sheltered in a church room while Reese was put behind bars for his own safety. The inquest was packed with the same townsfolk who had once turned their backs on Mai Anne, and Mrs. Gable stood first, wagging her finger, calling them fallen women, foreign temptresses, liars. Their vision wavered with humiliation. Then the judge called Reese forward. He spoke clearly, boldly. "They ran because he claimed they were his property," Reese said, his low, firm voice filling the room. "He tried to take them by force. He hurt them. I saw the bruises," gasps rippled through the crowd. "They fought for their lives," he continued. "And I stood with them. They are no criminals. They are the bravest women I have ever known." Mai Anne's eyes filled with tears, not of shame, but of overwhelming relief. Then, something unexpected happened. The town turned. Young Ben, the blacksmith's boy, stood and told how the sisters had mended his coat for free. The mercantile owner spoke next, then a ranch hand, then a miner. One by one, people admitted how Thorne had threatened them, cheated them, and scared them. Their fear broke. Their voices rose. Finally, Judge Croft struck his gavel. Anne, Mai, and Mr. Reese acted in clear self-defense. "They are free." The room erupted. Reese looked for the sisters. They ran to him, and he caught them both in his arms for the first time in front of others. Their tears soaked his shirt as he held them tight, not caring who watched. They rode out of town with supplies, horses, and a collection of sincere apologies. Back on the mountain, they rebuilt the barn together. They planted seeds. They repaired the cabin. Day by day, spring melted the snow and soothed the scars inside them. One warm evening, Mai Anne walked into the cabin. Their hair was loose, their eyes soft and filled with a deep, unwavering love. Reese set down the harness he was mending. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, in unspoken agreement, they moved toward the bed. There was no fear, no running, no shame. This time, the air was still and warm. He gathered them both into his arms, and they held him just as tightly. Three broken souls who had fought through fire and winter to find one another. And in the quiet of their small cabin, with the smell of warm bread and pine smoke in the air, they finally became whole. In time, the traveling preacher would be summoned, and a union unheard of but forged in survival and love would be consecrated on the mountain that had become their sanctuary.